Content warning. The album under discussion today, and our discussion of it, contains language that may not be appropriate to listen to in the presence of children. Please use your discretion. It also contains frank discussions of sexual harassment, racism, and class struggle. Welcome to Play Disc, the musical podcast in which my brother and I analyze a full album. I'm John Porabill.
And I'm Harrison Porabill.
And Harrison, how are you doing tonight?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty well. Did some house cleaning for once in a blue moon. So that's feeling pretty good. How about you?
Oh, we're doing all right. Yeah.
Anyways, so what's on the docket for today?
Well, you recommended this one, so why don't you go ahead and introduce it?
All right. The docket for today is the 2008 Atmosphere album. When life gives you lemons, you paint that shit gold. I may have been overly ambitious asking to do this one so soon. I know this is a pretty deep album for both of us. It's pretty important to both of us. It's one we both still listen to pretty regularly.
Indeed.
And trying to approach it with any kind of new lens is a challenge. And also, we probably know more about this offhand than anything else we've done so far. I don't know, you probably know more about the Beatles offhand, but otherwise.
Billy Joel, dude.
What? Oh, right, and Billy Joel.
Billy Joel, man, I barely prepped for that episode.
Yeah, my bad. Completely forgot about Billy Joel. But yeah, this one's just a little bit weird because I've gone into every other one we've done so far a lot less already in the know.
Yeah, it's
definitely the struggle for me here is going to be more on the not finding stuff to say, but not going on with all the things I do have to say.
The editor of this podcast appreciates your efforts in that regard. So I agree with you, and I think on this listen, one of the things that's really struck me is how much the way I relate to this album has changed as my life has itself changed. When this album came out, it was 2008. Of course, nationally, the big zeitgeist was the presidential election and Obama's candidacy. In my life, I had just graduated college and was as broke as I would ever be in my life. Just really struggling. And both of those factors and the way class struggle became a part of the 2008 presidential election and the way that I myself was really struggling poor at that time in my life made this album resonate very, very strongly.
Also, just the country looked like it was about to actually collapse.
I thought that was just what this country looks like.
Yeah. There are some retrospectives of traders on the floor of the stock exchange saying capitalism is dead. But to them that's a bad thing.
And they're not saying that now?
No, most of them seem to be celebrating. It's the socialists who are saying capitalism is dead, but this time they say it is a good thing.
So listening to that, it was enormously cathartic when the album first came out, when I was a flat broke recent college graduate. I mean, this album brought me to tears on a couple of occasions. It has remained a mainstay for me, this whole time. I've listened to it semi-regularly ever since it came out 11 years ago.
Timeghost.
I know, right? And I've had some rough times. I mean, my situation has gone up and down over the years, but it's been, I've been doing steadily better for the last 5 years or so. And it's interesting listening to this album coming from a place of not being able to immediately relate to it, in terms of circumstance, where this is an album that's really about people who are struggling, and I'm not that anymore. I find it still very resonant in the specifics of the details that Slug, the rapper, picks, and the stories that he's choosing to tell with this medium.
And that kind of like changing growth that you're describing happening gradually, that kind of ties into what I sort of want to hit on when talking about this album. Because for me, there seems to be sort of a conflict, but everyone involved seems to be on board with the change in direction that the band is going through. But there seems to be a bit of a conflict of whether or not it should be a more gradual change or a more immediate change. And I kind of wonder if there's a debate to explore there about the pros and cons of immediately, changing, 180 degrees, immediately turning around, or doing so more gradually.
So when you're talking about the changing, I mean, you're talking about how, for most of their career, Atmosphere was a rapper and DJ group, and in this album, they've made the transition into being more of a full band group, right?
Yeah. For most of Atmosphere's history, they have been the producer-rapper collaboration with Slug doing the rapping and writing, and Anthony Davis, doing the production. And for this album, they drastically changed their makeup and their approach, to the point where instead of being a duo, they were a quartet, where it was still Slug on vocals, and Ant on production / percussion, really. And they also added guitarist Nate Collins and pianist Eric Anderson, which, as you can imagine, transitioning from a largely sample-based production to one that involves a live band recording did a lot to change their sound and sort of approach to music. And it's kind of weird because they seemed, at least at the time, to my memory, they seem to be all in on this change. They seem to be pushing this idea that, no, Atmosphere is not a duo anymore. Atmosphere is a band.
Sure. I saw them at a festival tour the year after this album came out. Not a festival tour, a festival stop on their tour. And the chemistry between the whole band was really strong, especially with Nate Collins, the guitarist. I mean, he wasn't just the guitarist. He also did a lot of the backup vocals. Almost any time a chorus needed a singer, he would sing that chorus and had a lot of energy with that. But also just part of the evolving sound meant that almost every song on this album is guitar-based, very, very heavily guitar-based. It's all about Collins's riffs and licks, and he can really lay down a cool funk bed with that guitar, and he's doing really great work.
And it's weird because after this, they did seem to eventually move away from that band and recording structure. Like, as best I can tell, Nate Collins and Eric Anderson do still work with the group, but Atmosphere seems to have returned to being a duo over time.
Oh my God, I've been saying Collins this whole time. You're right, it's Collins.
I think I said it once too. Yeah, they did seem to eventually move away from that, and it's not that it was a bad structure, or a bad move for the band, but I kind of think on this album they simultaneously peaked in terms of what they could do with that, and also kind of struggled with what else to do.
It's so weird to me. Like, I mean, this was their first album with the new band members, and it feels perfect.
I don't know much about the production here, but I imagine that this happened sort of naturally, that incorporating Collis and Anderson into the band proper happened after just collaborating with them more than they had prior. So I don't know for sure that they had ever worked with the two before, but I also kind of can't imagine you add two new people to the band without any familiarity with them. So yeah, sort of what I imagine is that they were moving in a direction production-wise that required the use, a heavier use of session musicians, to the point where they felt the need to just include them in the band proper. And then from there, it seems like they didn't quite know how to make that work long term. That'd be my guess.
I'm looking it up as you're talking, and Nate Collis has a number of music credits. Every single one of them is on Rhymesayers. And some of them are earlier Atmosphere than this.
Right.
But he's only credited as a full member of the band starting with this album. So you got it exactly right, it looks like.
Yeah. And it wasn't until they started trying to promote and hype the family sign when I'd see interviews where Slug was really emphasizing, we're a band now. We're not just a duo. This is a full band. We're learning to work together as a band. But even at the time, I remember it feeling kind of desperate, because I've never really not thought of Atmosphere as a duo.
Like, they protesteth too much?
Yeah. Like, no disrespect to Collis and Anderson. They're great, but, I have 15 years worth of a back catalog to sort of fight against.
Oh, I hear you, and especially because after that, I think starting with Southsiders, they really no longer felt like a band, and I don't think Collis and Anderson were full members of the band anymore at that point.
Right. It's really weird because, trying to find this in retrospect, nothing really seems to indicate at any point that they were trying to change the definition of Atmosphere. Like, it's really weird because I kept trying to find stuff about this, and there are some, old media articles that have been cached, but for the most part, the internet almost seems to have forgotten there was ever a point when Atmosphere tried to be a band rather than a duo.
That's interesting. I mean, I couldn't find anything. I wasn't a regular follower of the hip-hop press during that time. I was a broke college student. I was trying to find and hold down a job.
But anyways, all that having been said, for me, sort of revisiting this album, it was a little bit weird, because this is one of my favorite albums. Growing up, Atmosphere was one of my favorite groups. I must have listened to this album at least 200 times in my life. And I kind of started at this place of either perfection or almost perfection in terms of how I evaluated it. So, going back into it, it kind of couldn't go anywhere else but down upon reevaluation. And the thing for me that I sort of realized when I re-listened to this is that I set my critical evaluation of an album pretty quickly, and I don't really challenge it. So, I've been working with more or less the same understanding of this album for, 11 years, I guess. And, I'd listen to it a lot, but I'd more or less just sort of let my own memory of it flow through me rather than actively engaged.
So, every time you listen to it, it's the same as the first time, right?
That's a little bit much, but yeah. I'm kind of re-entering that brain space, I guess. Because, I know damn near every lyric on this album by heart. But it's been a while since I've, actively engaged with it. And one of the things I found sort of going back to it is that it's a lot more flawed than I remember. And again, not bad. But I feel like there are a lot of songs on this album that sort of indicate the struggle with trying to reform into a band rather than a duo. And there's a lot of it that really works, to the point of perfection, but it also makes the parts that don't work stand out a lot more to me. And I feel bad. I feel like I'm going back to an old high school buddy who was kind of not the nicest and having to apologize to him yeah, you just kind of weren't the best. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't want to be mean, but
for me, coming back to this album, it continued to impress me. I think maybe I was always a little more clear-eyed about what minor flaws it does have. which is, for me, I think the darker songs don't work as well.
Yeah. Well,
so,
actually, that depends on how you want to define dark.
Well, yeah, I mean, probably the darkest song on this album is Guarantees, which I do still enjoy.
Which is damn near perfect.
It's a weird word for it. Yeah, it's a great song. But, like, the weaker moments on this album for me were Your Glass House and Breakaway. And for a while, the Skinny, and then a couple of years ago, I came across a new interpretation of this Skinny that sort of turned it upside down for me. I mean, that gave it some more novelty, but I still think is not the strongest foot on this album.
So it's funny because 10 years ago, whenever I would listen to this album, after the first, 3, 4, 5 listens, something like that, I just started skipping the Skinny. I didn't like it. It was unpleasant. It made me uncomfortable.
It certainly is an unpleasant song by design.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the lyrics are just...
They're mean.
Incredibly intimate. And mean, yeah, and it's. And
it wasn't until you shared the actual interpretation of that song that I was able to appreciate it a lot more. Because even though it's still very mean and still very ugly, it's also really clever.
It's clever, and so it's a song about Slug is nominally singing to a woman who is
a prostitute,
basically owned by a pimp. Right? Yeah, she's a prostitute. She's working for this pimp, and this pimp is like the devil incarnate. He's totally evil. He won't let her free. He won't let her out. But there are some lines in the song that just don't click properly with me.
Still gotta keep looking over their shoulder forever. That ain't freedom. Take his tax, makes you love it. Same old trap, but ain't you above it? He'll beat your ass in public. Now suck that skinny white pimp dick. Suck it.
There's a motif in the song talking about skinny white pimp dick, especially the one line, "Suck it all the way to the ass now."
That was one that always stood out to me even back in the day, but I just kind of was like, whatever.
Yeah, which is like, that's a weird way to put that. Okay, and then the other one that always got me was he'll keep a bitch in that stable for 50 years. Before I understood what is apparently the true meaning of the song, that always struck me as, that's a weird hyperbole. Like, either this pimp is 80 years old, or or there's some kind of, like, it's just a weird way to put that.
Right.
And then you find out, and then maybe you don't find out, maybe you find out years after the first time you hear this song, that the pimp in question is not a prostitution pimp, but in fact, it's a long, conceited metaphor for cigarettes.
Rockies taste better. Cleaner, fresher, smooth,
and it's a really clever one.
Yeah, and now
even if the metaphor is technically about beating women.
Yeah, that's true. I guess.
Yeah, as much as I'm not as unpleasant as this song is, and that it's not even close to my favorite, I did feel that we definitely needed to discuss this one probably more than any other because of that interpretive trick. It is a really good song at what it tries to do, but what it tries to do is deeply unpleasant.
That's true. And sure enough, I mean, Slug would quit smoking a couple years after this.
Right. And I mean, hey, good on him. He's making a rap song about telling the kids don't get into smoking. It's really bad, and he does it in the most unpleasant way I've ever heard, I think.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me is this is track 3 on the album. The thing that strikes me about this album is how perfectly paced it is. Mm-hmm. I mean, like the rest of us and Puppets flow together especially well. Mm-hmm. They're both really chill. They're both low key. Like the rest of us is almost relaxing.
Yeah.
In how it's almost like a rap lullaby. And then Puppets intensifies, when you get that drum beat almost 2 minutes into the song, the beat finally drops. But until then, it's also low-key in more of an aggressive bluesy way, so it really jumps off of where, like the rest of us, started. And then from there, it's like, okay, you're primed, now we're going to toss the Skinny at you.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know where else you could have put the Skinny.
Yeah, I don't know either. And
it's not a bad song, it's just really unpleasant.
Yeah, I hear you, man.
It's kind of funny because so that tour that you saw Atmosphere at, That was the same tour I saw them on. It happened about a year after this album came out, actually, because at the same time they reissued their first studio debut album called God Loves Ugly, which had been out of print for years. So the tour was rightfully named When God Gives You Ugly, I think it was called. And to this day, that is the most draining and fulfilling concert I have ever been to. Which is weird because,
when I saw
because
them,
it wasn't particularly hype. There wasn't like a mosh pit or anything. I mostly just stood in the same place the whole time. But I walked out of that concert like spiritually drained, almost cleansed. It was.
I wish I could have seen a full-length stop on that tour. I mean, I saw them at. They were doing Fun Festival in Austin, and it was about an hour. But boy, I would have loved to have seen a full-length concert of that tour.
Yeah, no, it was amazing. But the reason I wanted to bring this up, I went with a friend who had never heard When Life Gives You Lemons before, and we just had it playing.
Oh, okay.
We had it playing on the way over, and Yesterday came on, one of the songs with the surprise twist ending, and it's coming on in the car. We're probably parking right as it's ending, to be honest, and he's kind of blown away, like, wow, that's amazing. And then we get to the concert, and I was kind of like, he started up Yesterday at one point. I was like, well, come on, I already know the twist with this song. Is it really going to be that good? It was still that good.
Oh, yeah. And it's funny because, I think you and I, having had the benefit of following Slug's career, we knew, especially, before he got famous, he had Lucy Ford, the Atmosphere EPs. God Loves Ugly has that one song called Fuck You, Lucy. Mm-hmm. So we knew, from having followed his career for a while, that he had this recurring theme about this one ex that he was hung up on for a long time, Lucy Ford. And the lyrics to Yesterday, I don't think you need to know about Lucy in particular, but the lyrics to Yesterday are certainly misleading in the direction of making you think he's talking about an ex. I mean, part of Atmosphere's appeal, they're sometimes even called emo rap, because the way Slug raps, he raps about his feelings more readily than just about anybody else out there, and it's unusual to be this far into an Atmosphere album. Yesterday is track 9?
Track 9, yeah.
Yeah, Yesterday is track 9, and we're really far in here, and there hasn't really been a relationship song on this album. It's all about just generalized class struggle, being poor, the way we
being a woman,
coping mechanisms, being a woman. Coping mechanisms, substance abuse, etc. And so finally here we have the song that we think is the breakup song or the relationship song. And he's singing to somebody who's not named for most of the song. And it's inspired by having seen somebody that he thought looked like the person he's singing to.
Am I just going crazy cause I miss yesterday? Was that you? Look just like you. Strange things my imagination might do. Take a breath, reflect on what we've been through. Or am I just going crazy cause I miss you? I'm shook, I know, I pushed when I should have pulled. Took it all back if I could.
Instead of talking about the person, he's talking about how that inspired him to reflect on all his growth since the last time he saw this person. Which is a really interesting...
So, I mean, obviously it's about an ex-girlfriend, right?
Well, what does it say about me that was the first place my mind went?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think everybody's mind goes there. I don't think I've ever met someone who understood the first time.
Yeah, and there's certainly there's some lines that I think are intentionally misleading.
When you left, I didn't see it coming. I guess I slept. It ain't like you was running. You crept out the front door slow, and I was so self-absorbed I didn't even know. Which, yeah, you can interpret that literally, and I'm sure the song wants you to, but it turns out, no, it's pretty metaphorical. Yeah. I mean, sorry, what's this song actually about? I'm supposed to be playing stupid.
Oh, right. Well, earlier in the song, near the beginning of verse 1, there's that line, we can sit and reminisce about the old school, maybe share a cigarette because we both fools, chop it up and compare perspectives, life, love, stress, and setbacks. That doesn't sound like dad talk to me. And
honestly, that doesn't sound like lover talk to me.
Really?
Yeah, that sounds more like dad talk to me. Oh, by the way, what's the twist of this song?
Oh, yeah, and the twist is, where you're probably primed to be thinking it's an ex-girlfriend. The last line is, I thought I saw you yesterday, but I know it wasn't you because you passed away, Dad.
Hold on, sound effect. Oh, my heart.
We can make fun of the Twilight Zone. Glass House is a Twilight Zone twist. This is an O. Henry twist. I mean, we can make fun of that, but it is really effective. It gives me chills, and regardless of who he thought he saw, either way, it's a reflection on personal growth.
Yeah,
and it's interesting on this album because this feels like the most personal song on this album, and there are a couple of other songs on the last third of this album that are also personal, but this feels like the most personal to me.
Yeah, and it's funny because the song also very clearly has a counterpart or a foil.
On this album?
Yeah. I mean,
is it in her music box?
No.
Is that what you're thinking? Oh,
it's the Waitress. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
One's about a man reflecting on how he's changed after seeing someone who reminds him of his dad who passed away. The other one is about a guy who's so selfishly absorbed in his own wallow and self-pity that he can't realize he's failing his daughter.
Why don't we use that to pivot to talking about the Waitress?
Yeah, sure.
First of all, shout out to Tom Waits.
Yeah, what the hell?
Let's fake it, cause I ain't got the energy it takes for this relationship.
I'm waiting for a city bus to flatten me and transport me to the ever after happily. Maybe reincarnating with luck, come back to earth as a cockroach in your tip cup.
Tom Waits performs the beatboxing and some of the percussion on The Waitress, which is awesome. So what I'm going to say about The Waitress... So first of all, The Waitress is more of a... It's not as personal because he's playing a character.
Yeah.
It's a persona poem. He's playing a literal homeless man in Minneapolis, and he hangs out in this diner where he has this... I hesitate to use the word relationship, but he has this relationship with a waitress who is mean to him, but is fond enough of him to miss him when he's not there. If the narrator is to be believed, because he's also an unreliable narrator.
Yeah, I was about to say,
So
I don't believe
question
that
to
for
you-
a second.
Well, this is my question. Your interpretation then is that this guy is so mired in his own stuff, and he's so selfish, and he's so focused on getting through the day that he has not had time to be present for his family. My interpretation is different.
Okay.
I'm wondering if you just think I'm crazy, because the way I interpreted the lyrics was that the waitress is his daughter.
Yeah. No, that's what I'm saying. The
And that
Waitress is
she-
his daughter. Yeah, the point I'm saying is that
All
he is
right.
so self-absorbed in his own pity that he takes it out on his daughter. If you and I can't coexist, then let's fake it, because I ain't got the energy it takes for this relationship. The whole song is about himself.
Well, actually, I don't think she knows. I think she's dealing with someone that she just sees as a homeless guy and doesn't even know that that guy is her dad.
I don't agree with that interpretation, but I don't know. Slug decided to play this character, so I guess there's some degree of sympathy that's kind of intended to be baked in, but I have none.
Yeah, I think it's intentionally vague.
Mm-hmm.
Play disc!
Hi everyone, this is Ben Wright Human, cartoonist extraordinaire. I'm the guy responsible for all the iconography on this podcast. So when I'm not making John and Harrison look good, I'm creating independent comics, and my latest graphic novel, The Letters of the Devil 2, The Legacy of L, is being kickstarted this month. The Letters of the Devil is a mystery series about what would happen if someone exposed your deadliest secrets to random strangers. In this entry, we follow Melina Quinn, a criminology student who is writing her thesis on the events of the first book. Melina gets roped into investigating a friend's suicide after discovering that they may have been driven to do it after receiving an email from the series' antagonist, L. Melina's investigation will lead to discoveries she could never have anticipated. Secrets will be revealed, lives will be lost, and reality will come crashing down around a world unprepared for the truth. Backers of the Kickstarter can receive copies of the book as a PDF, paperback, or as a special edition, with a handmade book sleeve and a custom ciphered letter from L. Missed out on reading the first book? That's okay. There are reward tiers that get you both books. I am also offering a limited number of original 9x12 ink and graphite illustrations based on the style of the series. The Kickstarter for The Letters of the Devil 2 will run until March 1st, so hurry over to www.lotd-comic.com and become a backer. Again, that is www.lotd-comic.com. Rock on, guys, and never stop drawing.
Play disc!
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, I probably should have said this at the start of the discussion. When Life Gives You Lemons is not my favorite Atmosphere album. I just think it's the one most ripe for discussion.
It is my favorite. What's your favorite?
My favorite is You Can't Imagine How Much Fun We're Having, which is
Really?
probably the most literal album he's done.
I don't think I've given that more than 1 or 2 spins ever.
It's really weird because I kind of hit that album at a pretty unpleasant time in my life, and that album just kind of reinforced that indignation in a weird way. But yeah, I really do like that album.
Okay, interesting.
Also, I just think it has some of his best songs. And it ends on a particularly powerful note, in my opinion.
So then we have The Waitress ending on a song, or being a song about a homeless man that ends with a revelation that either the waitress is his daughter and she knows it, or she doesn't know it, or she's not, but she reminds him of his daughter. Point is, this is a guy who had a family that he just totally failed. And in a way, this is a whole album about failures. You know, we're dealing with people who are struggling in different ways, and the narrator of The Waitress is probably the one character on this album struggling the most. He's literally sleeping out in the cold. You know, this is the fate that most of the other characters on this album fear.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the people in this album are struggling in a variety of ways.
Yes.
I mean, I think Dreamer is kind of intended to be a sort of uplifting song at the end of the day, but
It's the closest thing to a happy ending on this album, and it ends with "fuck you."
yeah, basically. It was kind of uncomfortable sort of going back through this album with how many songs there were
Yeah.
almost about women suffering almost.
Do you think it was like poverty porn?
Yeah, I mean, not exactly. It felt a lot more like putting women up on pedestals, which, you know, knowing Slug's history, that is definitely something he is prone to doing in his songwriting.
Yeah, and I don't...
To go back to Your Glass House, I don't know if it's ever explicitly stated in the lyrics, but I always imagine the narrator of that song as a woman.
I think so too, and I think it's because early in the song he uses the word topless.
Ah! Yeah, I think that's probably it.
And I thought it was refreshing. I mean, in a way, he's kind of showing off how woke he is by singing about these female characters. But on the other hand, I mean, yeah, a lot of the people who struggle with this stuff, statistically, half of them are women.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a bad thing for Slug to highlight female characters in this group of songs. And the opposite would be if he only focused on the male characters. I mean, then we'd have erasure happening.
Yeah. I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer. It was just sort of one of those things for me of like, that's kind of weird to think about now. And he's portraying most of these women in a somewhat heroic light, almost Christ-like in terms of their capacity for self-sacrifice.
Well, that may be true of Dreamer and may be true of You, but it certainly isn't true of Your Glass
Oh,
House.
no.
Or the woman who's pregnant and smoking and like the rest of us.
So yeah, it was weird for me to sort of go back to, I guess. You know, You is another one that was just sort of like, you almost seem to be glamorizing and romanticizing this to a point.
Well, yeah,
Especially because You is,
romanticizing,
tonally a very fun song.
You just got off work, huh? Another night feel like the worst one. You didn't even count your tips yet, but you can tell that it ain't no big step. I don't see why you so nice. The customers are all fucks and lowlifes.
It is, and it's one of the only 2 songs on this album that I've ever actually heard on the radio.
That is bizarre.
Yeah,
Well, he sold
But,
out.
you know,
He's
the
canceled.
interesting-
We're done.
yeah. He used to be good. Then I heard one of his songs on the radio. But, You is interesting tonally, not just because it's by far the most upbeat song on this album, but also because it's the character in You is dealing with many of the same struggles as the character in Dreamer, but You ends with Slug as narrator hitting on the character.
Yep.
Which...
yep.
I almost wonder if these two songs should have been flipped on the order of the album.
Maybe. I definitely mixed them up a lot. Dreamer is a lot more distinct to me than You is.
I feel like, wouldn't it have been more effective if, right after The Skinny, if we had You, which is a song about this waitress who's struggling, and at the end of the night, Slug's like, hey man, I don't care what you're struggling with, I think you're pretty, let's hang out. And then, maybe one or two songs later, then we had Dreamer, which is that same story from her point of view, where she's dealing with everything, including raising 2 kids, which isn't covered in You.
Yeah.
And then one of the things that character deals with is sexual harassment.
I mean, I'd say they both do.
They both do, but, like, made to be more of a problem in Dreamer.
Oh, yeah.
She has to quit her job over it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Maybe that would have been interesting. Maybe that would have painted Slug the narrator in a different light.
It's also weird that Shoulda Known comes in between them.
Yeah.
Because Shoulda Known kind of hits a similar note that The Skinny does, except Shoulda Known is not nearly as unpleasant.
Yep, it's not nearly as unpleasant, but it is one of those, like, darker minor key songs.
Oh, yeah. I love Shoulda Known. It is definitely one of my favorite songs on the album, but... You know, it's also really weird that it comes between Dreamer and You, I think.
Yeah. Well, and this is a song.
By the way, Shoulda Known is another one of those
metaphorical
metaphorical songs. I'm not sure if you got the metaphor. It's about cocaine.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow, that's hidden, like, way down in the lyrics, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, super deep.
You really have to think about that.
Sorry, this is probably, for me, that song
spell.
was one of the first instances of, like, getting the metaphor top to bottom from the start. I got it. I get it. I get that reference. But I kind of want to transition a little bit to stuff on the album, like, because to me the album is a little bit, it's highs and lows to me on reflection. Like there's a lot of songs on here that are just damn near perfect, and then there's a lot that I kind of feel show the inherent inability to really reconcile what Atmosphere is as a band now. Like I like Dreamer and I like You, but they feel like Slug songs in terms of the lyrics, but in terms of production, they do not feel like Atmosphere songs.
They don't feel like Atmosphere the duo.
Right, and you know, you have Wild Wild Horses, Can't Break. I actually kind of like Wild Wild Horses, but Can't Break I think is pretty ignorable. Then some of the like best songs on the album, for example, Shoulda Known, Yesterday, those songs really could have very easily been done by, you know, old Atmosphere prior to the band transition.
But what about Guarantees?
That's the one, isn't it?
That's the, like, first of all, it's literally, Ant isn't even in that song.
I mean, presumably he's doing the producing, but yeah.
Yeah, but even then, there's very little production. Slug's voice is pretty dry throughout. There's no variable, like, there's...
I mean, I really do think
like,
Guarantees
one
was
line
the
where
song
echo
that
comes
was
in or anything
like,
like that.
okay, we need to be a band now. We need to be able to do this on command.
My better half is mad at making magic out of canned goods. My tax bracket status got a question in my manhood. My shorty got caught smoking weed at a concert, and if I smack 'em, everybody treats me like a monster. My neighbors ain't doing.
Yeah, you might be right. They played that at that festival show I saw them at, and I was so surprised.
Yeah.
I didn't even think that was like a tour song, let alone a festival song. It's literally just Slug and Collis. And Collis is playing that electric guitar, only slightly distorted, which, that's a weird sound. The electric guitar with nothing behind it.
Yeah.
Very few bands have ever pulled it off.
It's a grim song. A really good one, but...
Yeah. Yeah.
Like this is I think basically the height of what the live band approach to production does for Atmosphere. And I mean I think it justifies the entire experience.
It's interesting this is the one because it doesn't even have the keyboardist or the percussionist in it.
Yeah, but it demonstrates it's sort of like a proof of concept for a different way of doing things. You know, like, I know Yesterday, it relies on the fact that they have a live pianist, but, like, that could have been just about any sample. Whereas Guarantees is like
Right.
perfectly synced to the song. I'm assuming that's just Collis is a really good guitarist.
Yeah, no kidding.
That song is definitely like the height that justifies the whole experiment as far as I'm concerned, and definitely makes the parts where it doesn't quite work out still feel fine. But
Yeah,
this
and
is
I
kind
think
of
aside
this
from
is kind of
that-
for me like where that whole idea I talked about at the beginning of like, do you want to change all in one go or do you want to do it gradually? Because there are a lot of songs on here that seem to be, oh, we should be a lot more gentle and take this change in approach a lot slower. And then there are songs like Guarantees or Painting, for example, which are like, nope, we are going all in, whole hog, let's
And
do it.
aside from that, it's not just the sonic quality of this album that holds it together, but it's the themes. We've talked a lot about...
I mean, I'd say the one unifying theme of the album is Loss of Innocence, in one way or another.
I don't know if I'd put it that way. I think the one unifying theme is that everybody in this album is struggling, and everybody is dealing with it in different ways.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I kind of think those two
Struggle.
tie into each other, and,
Yeah.
the struggle causes you to lose innocence. Yeah. I think it's a pretty semantic disagreement we're having.
Yeah, that's true. But if you want to talk about Loss of Innocence, we of course do have one last big song on this album that we haven't really mentioned yet.
I have been avoiding it because I knew you were the one who wanted to get into it.
In Her Music Box is the closing song on this album. This is one of my favorite songs on this album, and it's the only song on this album from the perspective of a child, which I think is important in that she's the future. She has more of a chance than anybody else on this album to break this cycle, to get out of it, to forge her own life, to be happy and successful. But also, look at her surroundings. She is riding along with her dad, who is a drug dealer.
Say something out the window, bobbing his head to the beat on the radio. Good daddy won't smoke no weed until the bass cradles her back to sleep. That he can stake his Mac while she takes a nap to the sweet, pretty sounds of the gangster rap.
And she is maybe only dimly aware of exactly what it is that they're doing in this car. And it is...
She knows he doesn't like police.
Yeah. I really love the perspective of this child who is observing, but is perhaps not really fully cognizant of why the situation she's in is so weird.
Also, from a pretentious kind of literary perspective, one of the things I really like about this song, most of the other third-person narratives have been pretty strictly limited in their perspective, like to the character that's being described. And this one seems to have a somewhat more mature perspective. Like, a lot of the language that gets used seems like it pretty clearly could not have come from a 5-year-old's mind.
I mean, you could interpret that as Slug being an unreliable narrator editorializing over the situation.
Right.
Or you could interpret that as that this is the story that she's telling in retrospect, remembering these times when she was a very young child.
Right. Whereas, a song like Dreamer or You, it's a third-person perspective, but it's still pretty locked into that character.
Yeah.
Whereas this seems to be a lot more omniscient.
It's true. And what I love about it is that these are going to be happy memories for this character. Specifically because she hasn't lost her innocence, and therefore she doesn't know the reasons not to be happy about this.
Right. Also, it's a
I
shame. She
especially
just seems
love
like
that
such a
line.
good kid. I mean, okay.
I
Do you
especially-
remember as a kid going to McDonald's, getting the kids' meal, and eating it in the car? And do you remember once giving a crap about making a mess?
No matter how many times we got yelled at, no, I do not.
Meanwhile, this kid is laying out napkins.
Papa can't roll a messy office.
Yeah, sorry. I just love that little detail because I'm like, man, this is a good kid.
But also, she knows, like, he's dealing business out of his car, but she doesn't really know what business or what. I know I'm beating a dead horse, but
Yeah.
that fascinates me as a narrative conceit of this song. And that and the line in the middle, escape is a paradox because her childhood is locked in that music box.
I was waiting for it.
This is someone where music, which to a grown-up is an escape, it can't even serve that purpose to a kid because the music is her whole life. What is there to escape from?
And imagine when she finds out those songs all have meaning.
Which she's on the verge of because, she knows all the words, but she leaves out the bad ones.
Except bitch.
Except bitch. She always sings the word bitch because it makes Daddy laugh. It's her magic trick.
Yeah.
That is poetry. She experiences the music, but she doesn't get the context yet.
Mm-hmm.
She just knows the way her dad reacts to it.
Yeah, it's really weird because I remember back in the day, I wasn't particularly too terribly impressed with this song until you pointed out that line to me, the escape is a paradox because their childhood is locked in that music box. And you pointing out that line to me and just sort of how brilliant it is, it kind of like twisted me around of like, oh wow, this song is actually great.
Yeah. Also, and this is a minor thing, but it ends with that music box slowing down just a little bit, which is the same sound that the album started on.
Yup. And then what's Like the Rest of Us about? You're
gonna break my heart. It's quite possibly that same girl grown up.
Yup.
Or maybe it's her mother.
Or maybe it's her mother.
Or maybe it's any one of her friends.
Maybe you'll never be able to break the cycle.
So Harrison, at the end of every episode, you and I always pick a key track, which we choose by our own arbitrary measures. Could be the best, could be the most interesting, could be the one that symbolizes the rest of the album the best. And we don't share them with each other beforehand, so we're revealing these to each other as we record.
As I recall, you said your short list had 6 songs?
Whew! Yeah, this was the hardest one. We're on episode 9 now, and this has been the hardest one to narrow down.
Okay,
by a lot.
So I sort of just want to take a guess at what those 6 were.
Oh, okay. All right.
So in her music box,
Yep.
Guarantees, Yesterday,
Yep.
Painting, Should Have Known, Dreamer?
You're 4 for 6.
Yeah.
2/3.
Anyways, yeah. I feel okay about that.
All right. Well, I'll go into my picks, but let me hear yours first.
So it's weird because I went into this album with a key track in mind. Sort of just my favorite when I was a kid. And man, when I got to that song, I was, wow, that was kind of cringy to think that it was my favorite.
I was thinking about that when I got to that song because I was like, I don't think Harry's going to pick this for a key track anymore.
Yeah, no, my favorite song on this album used to be Me, which is still good. I still like it a lot. But, as an 18-year-old or 17-year-old, my reaction was like, oh my god, it is Me!
Yeah.
Which, man, that's super cringy now. But it's interesting because the choice of a key track was actually pretty simple for me.
Oh, yeah?
I think because most of the songs, like, their power had kind of already worn off on me. So anything that really stood out again just kind of got me immediately. Because my key track was Painting.
Ain't no color paint gonna cover the stains. The pictures on the wall will all remain. And even though he's home now, sound is safe. Surrounded by the faces that he places faith. The images visit from the past.
Okay, that's a good one.
It's a really good song. I recognize that it was a good song back in the day, but on this album, that seems to be the one song that has gotten, better as I get older.
What's interesting about Painting to me is that this is a different kind of trauma that this character is dealing with from all the other characters on this album.
Yeah.
He's got PTSD, right? That's the idea?
I mean, I just kind of assumed he was an alcoholic. I didn't really go into why he was an alcoholic.
Okay.
If the oxygen escapes, it'll smother the flame.
Maybe I just associate troubled people who do art in things like this with PTSD, just based on cultural assumptions. I mean,
also, for what it's worth, the story of this song is not really why I like it. What I like about it is just the very florid imagery.
Oh yeah.
It is a very visual song in terms of its symbols and images. And it's more evocative than I think anything else on the album, except maybe the Skinny, but that's only if you know what the song's about and if you're not disgusted by it.
Right.
So yeah, for me, it was kind of surprising just how easy that was for me.
This is a concept we've talked about in previous episodes, right? We mentioned this in the Linkin Park episode and in the Beatles episode, probably a couple of others, where it's the one that took the longest to hit you, sometimes sticks with you the most because it still has the most recency in your brain, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I had a devil of a time picking a key track on this one. There's 15 songs on this album, and I had it down to 6. So I seriously considered naming In Her Music Box, The Waitress, Guarantees, Yesterday, You, and in the end I had to think about it and say, what if somebody who is not familiar with Atmosphere, maybe even not familiar with like Rhymesayers or indie rap in general, says, sell me on this, what's the one you hand them? And for me it's Dreamer.
What?
That's the story. That's...
I guess.
It embodies all this album's themes. Struggle and, dealing with sexism, sexual harassment, class struggle, being poor, trying to raise a family, trying to hold true to your own morals, trying to hold true to yourself, how you cope. It is one of the more intensely narrative songs on this album.
Yeah, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Well, sort of.
Huh?
It has a beginning and a middle, that's for sure.
It has an end.
She's born with a heart defect.
It's just an end with sequel hook.
Well, that's the thing about this that gets me, is that she struggles throughout her life. She has health problems. She has 2 small children and doesn't have a partner to help her raise them. She's putting herself through school while working part-time jobs and really struggling to make it all fit together. And we don't really get a resolution to any of this. The closest that we get to a resolution to this song is at the end, where Slug says, it's all the same, we all struggle. Sometimes you gotta say, fuck you.
Smile and she doesn't return it. Give her room, man, don't disturb it. If it makes it hurt less to curse and fight, go ahead and hate the world, girl, you earned the right. Now, but she still dreams after she woke. Tight hold on that hope.
To me, that fuck you is so cathartic. I pump my fist with it almost every time. It's this acknowledgement that, life is hard and we're doing what we can, and you gotta have the conviction to live with yourself. And what he's done is he's told a whole life, or, gosh, we hope not a whole life, but, he's given us a very complete picture of this character throughout her life so far. And it's a difficult life, and it's a struggle, but it's not a hopeless life.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I love about it. I also just really love the music. We've talked a lot about Solace, the guitarist, but Anderson is really pulling his weight on that Fender Rhodes piano. The chiming really adds a lot to this song. It's that major key vibe. It's upbeat. It's firing on all cylinders. We also do a Did You Like It segment, but I mean, come on.
Yeah, I mean, I liked it less than I thought I did, but, Oh no, I've revised it from a 99% to a 93%. Ooh.
I think, for me, this is a stone cold classic album. It's probably my favorite rap album of all time. I mean,
okay.
This is a classic for me. This whole album, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, suffice to say, we liked it.
So that's about it for Atmosphere.
Yeah, really good album. So, John, what is the episode going to be 2 weeks from now?
I have brought an album for consideration, but before we can figure out whether we're going to do that album, we need to roll the dice for our Play Disc Request Lottery. For those of you just joining us, the Request Lottery is a drawing that we run at the end of each episode, where if you have made a request for an album that you'd like to hear us cover, we're going to roll the dice and see if we go with one of those suggestions. The majority of the contributions have come from our patrons at the $5 and above level. Each of those gets assigned a number between 1 and 100. And I'm about to roll a 100-sided die. Or a pair
Man,
of
we're going to be in
100-sided
trouble if
dice
we ever
to-
get more than 100 patrons.
That would be a wonderful problem to have. At which point we will figure it out. But I'm rolling a D100, and if the number that comes up corresponds to one of those albums on the Request Lottery spreadsheet, then we're going to cover that in 2 weeks. If not, we'll do the one that I have in my back pocket for us here. You can view the spreadsheet We'll have a link to it in the show notes. It's going to be a publicly available Google Docs spreadsheet. I'm also going to post a video of this die roll, just to make sure we're completely on the level here. All right.
Oh god, is the table you're rolling on level?
Yes, but the dice are weighted.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, so. The number that has come up is number 93. The 3 die actually went under my monitor, so the camera didn't capture it. I assure you, no funny business. 93. Oh, just barely missed one. We had a suggestion at 95, but 93 is not assigned to a suggestion. So it's going to be a normal episode, which I have planned out as Hokey Fright, the first and only album by the hip-hop folk duo The Uncluded, which is Aesop Rock and Kimya Dawson from 2013. It's a very strange combination, and we're going to talk about just how strange it is and what the results of that came from. When I first had the idea to do a podcast covering full albums, this is one of the first ones that came to my mind because it is so unique. There is nothing else like it, and I can't wait to explore it with you in 2 weeks, Harrison. That'll do it for this week. Hey, if you made it this far, thank you so much for listening. I also want to thank our good friend Ben Wright Human for providing the promotional artwork for us, that green and purple portrait of the dashboard of a car. You can find more of his work at bwhcomics.com if you'd like. Ben also supports us on Patreon, along with Vita Porabil, Chase DeMonte, and Adam Herchak. We are extremely grateful for all their support. And dear listeners, if you would like to join them in supporting us, you can visit patreon.com/playdiscpodcast. That's DISC, Playdisc Podcast, to make a monthly contribution. It is completely optional. The show is free and always will be. But if you do donate, we'll read your name at the end of each episode, just like we did for the 4 who currently support us, as well as give you access to benefits such as an entry into our request lottery, which you just heard us draw from, or a library of bonus episodes in which Harrison and I discuss movies about music. Also, listeners, if you want to contact us, we're easy to find. You can email us at playdiscpodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Facebook under the name Playdisc Podcast. We're on Twitter with the name @PlaydiscPodcast. I hope you'll join us in 2 weeks for our discussion of The Uncluded. But until then,
Catch you on the B-side.
B-side. Like chocolate.
Nailed it.
And now, a quick word on copyright. Today's episode used clips from several songs by Atmosphere, namely Like the Rest of Us, The Skinny, Dreamer, You, Painting, Yesterday, The Waitress, and In Her Music Box, all written by Atmosphere, and Guarantees, written by Atmosphere and Nate Collis. The rights to the recordings of these songs are currently held by Rhymesayers Entertainment. We've used these short clips for purposes of commentary without formal licensing, as allowed under Section 107 of the U.S. Copyright Act of 1976, also known as Fair Use. The Playdisc theme song was written and recorded by me under my stage name John Eric, and all other aspects of the Playdisc podcast are jointly owned by myself and Harrison Porabil, and licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike 4.0 International License. Playdisc!